Hi, welcome to my research proposal presentation, where I'll be discussing the role of home garden behaviors during COVID-19. So I'm just going to start by giving a little bit of background information about some major topics in the proposal. Home gardening is defined as a garden managed by a single household on owned, rented, or borrowed land, either on the same property as the residence or adjacent land, such as a vacant lot, tree lawn, or right of way. Any type of edible foods can be grown, such as the examples provided in the bullet points listed on the left. And I provided a few examples of some gardening styles like traditional in-ground gardens, container gardens, or raised beds. Another topic I wanted to give the basics about is urban agriculture, which in short means growing food between cities. This is important because urban agriculture encompasses home gardening, in addition to other elements such as growing fruit trees, raising chickens for meat or for eggs, and bee farming for honey cultivation. Of course, some of these things may not happen. It just depends on what is permissible in your area. Urban agriculture has a sustainable element to it, since homes in cities and towns are most likely to have less property space to work with. So you may see methods of urban agriculture, especially gardens, in underutilized spaces around homes or in public spaces, on building walls, and even on rooftops. The last background topic I wanted to share with you is about industrial agriculture, which I will discuss in more detail shortly in the presentation. These are a few important alarming facts and statistics to consider about industrial agriculture and how unsustainable it is. There's a term I've heard recently called superstitious learning, which basically means when someone repeats the same patterns for a long period of time because that's how they've always done it. Well, industrial agriculture has been around for a long time, and it's time to reconsider how sustainable these farming methods really are for the health of our environment. If industrial agriculture remains unchanged, our food production will decrease by as much as 30% in the next 20 to 50 years. And that's mainly because the Earth's topsoil will be gone in 60 years. So that's 60 more harvests left if we don't change anything. I'll talk about the reasons for this in a minute, but this is a huge problem considering our population is growing and it can take decades before the world's topsoil supply can regenerate. The last statistic point shows the effect of food shortage during COVID-19 on our world food insecurity and how that figure is projected to almost double by the end of the year. There are some distinctive patterns in history, like World War II, for example, where some kind of event triggers the economy to regress, which causes a food shortage due to loss of jobs or other reasons, and that results in bringing gardening to the home front in some way. So the main purpose of my research proposal is to assess if home garden behaviors increased during the pandemic in South Louisiana. And my hypothesis is that the pandemic has followed a similar path to previous historical events where home gardening increases in response to economic crisis. The first component of the research proposal discusses the problems of industrial agriculture in more detail. The first issue is high volume of fossil fuels being utilized to maintain crops to such a large scale, from the time the seed is planted to the time the finished product is harvested and then has to be distributed. The next is soil tilling, which this is something new I learned from a gardener's perspective myself. Tilling may have its own benefits for humans, but it's really detrimental to the soil. And the sad thing is, a lot of farmers, especially in industrial agriculture, don't know that. When soil is tilled, it releases carbon into the atmosphere, which contributes to carbon emissions or greenhouse gases. If you recall the statistic I previously mentioned, this is also why the world's topsoil is diminishing and it's causing erosion of the topsoil. Monocropping systems are the main method of industrial agriculture, which means maintaining one crop at a time. Since methods of no-till gardening aren't being utilized, such as planting cover crops that prevent the topsoil from being exposed and encouraging natural fertilization processes and moisture retention, there is a higher need for water irrigation. And monocropping systems also encourage the use of pesticides. We are beginning to uncover the problems with pesticide use, like glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. This wipes out the soil's biodiversity and all the microorganisms that live in the soil. And they have an extremely important job of being able to metabolize the carbon sequestered or absorbed in the ground. Another issue is separating livestock from crops. There are so many problems with large-scale industrial livestock farms as well that I'm sure you've heard of before. Instead of integrating livestock to be rotated on different areas of land to graze and provide natural fertilization to the ground, as Mother Nature intended it to be, chemical fertilizers are being used, and the chemicals, including the pesticides as well, are ending up in our water supply. And scientists are currently studying their effect on humans. If it doesn't have positive effects to our soil, then it probably isn't good for our health. The next part of the proposal discusses sustainability in urban agriculture. The University of Southern Australia created a program called the Edible Gardens Project. Researchers conducted an online survey and then selected participants from that survey to do an urban agriculture analysis. 71 subjects were doing their project at home, and 2 school gardeners decided to participate. The goal was to measure productivity, resource efficiency, and financial savings in urban agriculture practices. Participants were able to select with which method they wanted to work on, and they were grouped into 5 categories, including orchards, in-ground mixed beds, chicken egg groups, raised mixed beds, and wick mixed beds. And when I say mixed beds, I just mean that they grew more than one crop at a time. And if you weren't aware, a wicking bed is basically a raised bed, and it has some kind of pipe that runs through to the bottom of the bed, and it has holes in it. So you irrigate the bed through the top of the PVC pipe or whatever you want to use, and it encourages a slower watering process. The participants were asked to log the time and money spent on maintenance, the volume of water in its source, and the weighted production yield. This was performed for a period of 4 growing seasons. The results showed that in-ground mixed beds had the lowest startup cost. Buying first or second-hand equipment also further influences factor. The group with the lowest inputs, which were time, production yield, and retail price, was the raised mixed bed group. The group with the highest water use efficiency was the chicken and egg group, then the orchard group, and last was the wicking beds. The results also showed that bigger gardens didn't necessarily mean more fruitful in production. They estimated that 10 to 20 square meters per person is optimal. The total harvested product weight in this study measured at 3,479 kilograms. Retail prices of food items were researched and applied to the production yield. That total came out to be around $28,000 in Australian currency. I did want to note that in this study, gardeners claimed to use organic methods, and the retail prices weren't compared to organic prices. So essentially, more costs can be saved if you choose to grow organically. Irrigation costs mainly depend on if a water main was used and how much rainfall occurred in the area. Important results to compare in the survey was that they were asked about how much time they would spend per week maintaining the garden, and the median value for that was about 3.6 hours, when in fact they spent an average of 1.3 hours a week doing maintenance. This is significant because another question on the survey asked them what their biggest challenge of gardening or participating in urban agriculture was, and the top answer was not having enough time. The survey also asked subjects what their main motivator was for the project, and 59% answered that they wanted to save money. So this study shows that urban agriculture and home gardening can be sustainable and beneficial to save on costs and further reduce food insecurity. The next topic in the proposal discusses what the 4-H Club did for citizens at home and soldiers on the battlefield during World War II. They received a lot of government funding to give educational materials and demonstrations about gardening and agricultural practices to people at their homes or at public meetings. They also shared information about food preservation, and frugal recipes were distributed that were based off of recipes that they can make with rations. You may have heard the term victory gardens recently during the pandemic. This started during World War I and resurfaced during World War II. The reasoning behind its name came from the fact that people were realizing that soldiers in combat were not getting enough sustenance from only eating crackers and salt meat. So many people believe we essentially were successful in the war because people were able to provide soldiers with food choices to sustain them. 4-H created a program called Feed a Fighter, and it was designed to where each member was assigned to be responsible for feeding a soldier with homegrown cultivated foods for 1 year. They did this by creating rations which were graded from A to D. They used various food preservation methods to do this. A rations were the most nutrient dense in terms of vitamins and energy, and D rations were created for emergencies only. And this ended up being really successful. Many people, including children, were able to do this, and a lot of people were able to provide for more than one soldier. And it was even reported that one 4-H member was able to provide food for 34 servicemen. The last component of the proposal was about reasons or benefits why people garden at home. I looked at 2 different studies to address this subject. The first was a survey conducted in Syrian refugee camps in northern Iraq that housed around 26,000 refugees. They participated in garden competitions at the camps, and 26 individuals were asked questions about their experiences. The common answers were grouped into themes, and these account for reasons why people enjoy gardening besides the need to address food insecurity and save money. The themes were the healing potential of gardening for mental health and psychological trauma, spending time alone and outdoors, having a sense of community and belonging, gardening with friends and family, physical and mental stimulation, and feeling comfort knowing where their food comes from. The second study was an observational study about productivity with home gardening during the COVID-19 lockdown in the Philippines. They had similar experiences that our country did in terms of food shortages from job losses. They were encouraged to stay home and could only go out for emergencies, and even had to have a pass to do so. The government distributed education materials and seeds to the community, telling them it would be a good idea to grow supplemental food supply time being. 2 Facebook groups that mainly had Filipino members were analyzed. It included 200 posts with its respective comments. People were using this page as a way to show off their gardens virtually. It served as a space for friendly competition about who could produce the highest yields with what they had. Many principles of urban agriculture were observed, such as using small spaces, using recycled materials and containers, and using homemade compost, and also regrowing other vegetables from food scraps and so on. Others reported in posts and comments that they enjoyed gardening to escape boredom and fill the free time they had doing something productive and staying outdoors. Many new gardeners said it gave them a reason to wake up early and do something constructive. This study shows how people can use home gardening to their benefit and as a potential new hobby when normalcy has been disrupted from the pandemic. Now I'm going to switch over to the actual research that I will conduct for this topic, and I'm going to use a Qualtrics survey. I will create a Facebook post inviting people to participate in the survey and include the link for the survey in there.